Food for Thought is a listener-supported podcast, which means as a supporter, you get bonus episodes, access to our private chat community, early bird specials, and so much more. Thank you for valuing this podcast and keeping it going by supporting it at joyfulvegan.com/donate or by going to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau and picking the level that's right for you. Today's topic is what's wrong with eggs. The hens don't have to be killed, so what's wrong with eating eggs? Welcome to Food for Thought, everyone. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I am your host. The mission in my work has always been to empower people to make informed food choices and to debunk myths about veganism. Today's episode is going to do just that. And this episode itself is brought to you by Plain Products, the fabulous vegan-owned company offering cruelty-free, zero-waste personal care products free of animal products and featuring a convenient, innovative refill system that's closing the loop on waste. You buy your products, whether it's shampoo or conditioner, you choose your fragrance, and you enjoy whatever you bought. And when you're running low, you order a refill. And when the new products arrive, you simply put those empties in the same box and you use the label that they give you for free. Plain Products then sanitizes the aluminum bottles and refills them, literally closing the loop. So if you go to joyfulvegan.com/hair, you get 15% off every single time you order. There's a code over there to get that 15% off, and you're going to want to use that link. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. I know you're going to become a fan. So head over to joyfulvegan.com/hair and thank Plain Products for keeping this episode ad-free. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and you're not going to have ads interrupt this episode at all. So thank you to the listeners, and thank you to Plain Products. Hi, everyone. You know, we got back from Italy and Croatia, checking out all of the vegan awesomeness in all of these places and hosting our trips. You've probably heard by now that we have a 2025 trip to Croatia that you can join us on. We have our own yacht. We're going to be on the Adriatic for 8 days, 7 nights, and there are a couple spots left. We also just announced our trip to France, to Paris and Bordeaux and the Dordogne region, which is my favorite region of France. And we are half filled, and it has been live for 12 hours. So if you're interested in joining me in France to a region that you would absolutely not be able to eat vegan in very easily, you can do it, applying all of the tips that I've been giving you over these years. But it is not a very vegan-friendly region, and we have a trip going in June 2025. So head over to joyfulvegan.com, and while you're at it, make sure you register for my ramen online cooking class. It's definitely happening. It's completely confirmed. The recipes are already over there once you register, and if you use the code Food for Thought, listening to this podcast for just a few days, I'm offering you the opportunity to bring a friend for free. So go over to joyfulvegan.com and join me. So let's talk about eggs. We're talking about chicken's eggs. We're talking about, duck's eggs, I suppose, if ducks are also being raised for their eggs, and all of the same principles apply. So the most common question I get from people is, what's wrong with eating eggs? If you don't have to kill a hen to get her eggs, what is the problem? What is the problem? We're going to talk about backyard hens. We're going to talk about free range in this episode. But I want to just emphasize that I asked this question as well before I was vegan. I was vegetarian for many years before I was vegan. And it's a legitimate question. Of course, once people start realizing there is exploitation, there is cruelty in the egg industry, the first thing people say is, well, I want to get free range then, and I want to just get backyard eggs, and I don't want to hurt animals. So how can I do that? How can I not change my habits too much, but not hurt animals? So I totally get it. And I want to answer your question today. If you have more questions on top of it after you listen to this episode, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know what they are. But the short answer, and you can just turn this podcast episode off after you hear this answer. The short answer is the hens are killed. The hens are killed. Why? Because there is no such thing as a slaughter-free animal agriculture system. Okay, that's the short answer. The longer answer is a bit more involved. And what we have to remember is that, hens did not come into this world figuring out that their eggs would be good binding ingredients for baked goods. That's not what they exist for, right? Even though we've been kind of indoctrinated to believe that, they kind of exist for protein and they just exist for omega-3 fatty acids and they just exist for the lutein. No, they don't. They are there because they are part of a chicken's reproductive system. Hens, the females of the chicken species, hens lay eggs for the purpose of having chicks. It's not unlike the process in mammals where an egg drops out of the uterus, and in the case of mammals, out of the body. But if they're fertilized, they would produce embryos that would turn into babies, right? So unfertilized, they drop out of the uterus. I think I heard someone call it once the most optimistic organ in our bodies, which I love, right? Because every month, or at least in the case of humans, it's every month. In the case of chickens, this happens daily, and we'll talk about that a little bit because in the wild, it wouldn't happen daily. But in humans, it happens every 28 days, every 27 days, every 30 days. The most optimistic organ in the human body and the mammalian body is when the egg drops out of the uterus. And if it's unfertilized, it just keeps going because there's no point. But if it is fertilized, then of course that's how life is created. Now, when it comes to eggs, it's a little bit of a different process, but not very different. As it's dropping out of hens don't have a uterus, but they have what would be called a shell gland. If the egg is fertilized by a rooster, then of course that egg would turn into a chick. But if the egg is not fertilized, that's what we eat. That's what we eat. I was a huge fan of eggs before I realized what I was actually eating. And I was not alone in eating those eggs. The average American consumes about 288 eggs per year, according to data from the USDA. Now, this figure has been increasing over the years, sadly, because of changes in dietary trends, because eggs are so cheap, and because of the popularity of high-protein diets. Also, according to the USDA, in the United States, over 100 billion eggs are produced annually. 100 billion eggs. How is that even possible? It's possible because at any given time, there are approximately 325 million laying hens basically being forced to produce these eggs. These hens are typically raised for about 18 to 24 months before their egg production declines, at which point they're killed and replaced by younger hens. All these numbers, by the way, are 2024 numbers. Now, I don't know about you, but it's pretty hard for me to wrap my brain around those numbers. If you think about 325 million hens, you pretty much can equate that with the population of the United States. Every man, woman, and child. That's one hen for every man, woman, and child in the United States, because the US population is about 331 million. So 325 million hens, 331 million humans. It just gives you an idea of how many hens we're talking about. So where are they? You'd think we would see 325 million hens hanging around somewhere with that many being used for egg production. But of course, we don't see them. The egg industry doesn't only not want us to see them, but obviously in order to have that many animals, you have to confine them, because otherwise we would be taking up even more land than we're already taking up using for animal agriculture. So in the case of the egg industry, they're confined in what are called battery cages. I know you've heard of these battery cages. You've heard that term before, no doubt. These are tiny wire cages that measure about 18 to 20 inches, and they hold 5 to 11 hens. It really depends on the specifications of the company who house those hens. So 5 hens to 18 by 20 is still a very small amount of space, or 11 hens to an 18 by 20 inch cage. So pretty small. And each hen will spend her entire life in this crowded space, about the size of a filing drawer, with 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 other hens. They're unable to lift even a single wing. Now, these cages are stacked up on top of one another, with the waste of the chickens above constantly falling onto the birds in the lower cages below, and into huge manure pits that line these sheds. The stench of ammonia and feces is so strong and it's so noxious that it's the first thing you notice when you enter any of these places. And as you can imagine, disease runs rampant and many birds die. And that's just calculated into the cost benefit analysis. It's just par for the course. It's pretty awful also because humans don't really come into these sheds. Most of them are automated and mechanized, and so the survivors are often forced to live with their dead and dying cage mates. So it's pretty awful. The light in the sheds is constantly manipulated to maximize egg production, and chickens are often starved for as long as 14 days at a time to shock their bodies into another egg-laying cycle. So this practice is called forced molting, and it's been banned in some countries because it's considered so cruel. Now, one point I didn't mention is, if it's not bad enough, is that the battery cage hens have a portion of their beak cut off with a searing hot blade, and no painkillers are used. Now, this is because they're in such confinement and there's so much stress that in order to manage that, of course, you want to protect your own territory. You would then peck at your cage mates so much that it would actually injure them and potentially kill them, and that cuts into that cost benefit ratio. So that's something that the industry does, is instead of giving them more space, they actually just cut off their beaks. Now, I'm going to wrap up our description of the life of a battery cage hen because I know it's not pleasant, but basically after 18 months or so in these deplorable conditions, their bodies are so exhausted and their egg production drops. And so these are called spent hens by the industry, and they're shipped to slaughterhouses. They're not covered under the Humane Slaughter Act, so don't believe the hype that they're in any way, humanely killed or humanely slaughtered. The Humane Slaughter Act is unenforced typically anyway, but birds, poultry in their words, are not covered under the Humane Slaughter Act. And rabbits are also categorized as poultry by the USDA, so they're not covered either. Just FYI. So studies indicate that anywhere from 30% to over 90% of hens have bone fractures or breaks because of the conditions they endure in battery cages by the time they are sent to slaughter, by the time they get on the transportation trucks and sent to slaughter. The high incidence of broken bones is primarily due to the lack of exercise, because, you've heard that in order to keep those bones strong, you got to move them, right? You got to stress them, you got to exercise them, but they're not moving. So their bones are very weak. They're not getting the nutrition. And one of the reasons they're not only not getting the nutrition they need, of course, there's nutrition in their feed, but because so much of their calcium from their bodies is being used to create the eggs themselves, right? The outer shell, that's calcium based. It means that all the calcium is being pulled from their bones. And so their bones are incredibly weak at the end of that 18 months. And they're just, the strain of egg production, they're just weakening their bones over time, weakening their bodies over time. So their bodies are so damaged and their flesh is so damaged that these are the hens who are sold not only when they go to slaughter, they don't go to slaughter and they get buried in some, cemetery. They are sold for cheap meat grade products like chicken noodle soup or pet food or canned chicken, right? So because their flesh is so damaged that they can't be sold for whole breasts, right? I mean, you'd be able to see all of the bruises, you'd be able to see all of the damage. And so in the end, when they are sold for slaughter, there's more money to be made off of their bodies, but in very, very, very cheap ways. A lot of this cheap meat goes to the National School Lunch Program. So you can see how this cycle of exploitation continues by dumping this low-grade meat onto low-income families. And that's another story for another time, but that is the reality. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, I don't want any part of that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to pay for that. So I just get free range, right? I just get free range. I get organic. I get, antibiotic free, whatever, all of the labels that we look to so that we're not supporting what we know to be the most exploitative, the most cruel, the most violent processes. Now, I have done episodes specifically just on free range, but I will tell you a little bit about free range. look, we all want to do what's better, and better is better than awful, but it's still pretty awful. So free range, the regulations stipulate that hens labeled as free range, they have to have access to the outdoors, but that is a very general term. And so that could just mean that they have access. That doesn't mean they actually take advantage of the access. So there's usually some kind of small door leading to usually a fenced in area. And that outdoor space per hen is pretty limited. So in the end, you still get a pretty tight confinement situations because not a lot, most producers are not going to meet the expectations of having very spacious conditions. Moreover, the term free range can be misleading. There have been lots of lawsuits against companies that use that term, and then when they go actually investigate what the conditions are, they don't live up to those claims at all. So you really, 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 really want to know exactly who you're supporting. And really the only way to do that is to kind of go check it out yourself, which most people aren't going to do. So in the case of eggs labeled free range, hens may still be crowded in indoor facilities for extended periods, particularly during adverse weather or at night. That can diminish the practical benefit of outdoor access. Now, as I already alluded to, I didn't allude to it, I said it. There is no such thing as a slaughter-free animal agriculture system. So even eggs labeled free range, those hens who have produced those eggs, whether they're sold by a small backyard operation, there is no such thing as a slaughter-free operation. So it starts with the males being killed at hatcheries upon birth. Because why? Because males don't produce eggs. They're males. And it's only an industry that exploits the female reproductive system. So if you are in a hatchery and all these little adorable yellow little baby chicks are coming around the conveyor belt, they're sexed at that moment. And as soon as the workers see that there's a male, they quite literally get chucked into they just get ground up alive. It's pretty horrific. I won't give you all the details, but the point is that is the beginning of slaughter in this industry. So it begins with slaughter and it ends with slaughter. The majority of eggs people eat come from hens who were confined their entire lives, but I will say all of them have come from hatcheries where the male chicks were killed upon being sexed, which is usually within a day of their birth. Usually within a day of birth, the male chicks are killed. So as I said, it begins with slaughter and it ends with slaughter because every single hen raised, kept, confined for her eggs is killed at the end of her production. Because no business will keep a business where you are basically spending money to take care of that animal, keep that animal alive, and not make money in return. So I can't impress upon you enough that I'm not saying that everybody who has a farm or a ranch is an evil person and they can't wait to kill these animals. It's not what I'm saying. But the fact of the matter is, these are industries that are based on the death of these animals because they're based on profit. And so there just really is no way around it. Now, if you're interested in supporting the most humane practices, I would suggest that you look for practices and products that guarantee that no animal has suffered, and that is basically no eggs. So there's lots of plant-based versions of this, and we can talk about this in another episode around how to bake without eggs. When people ask me, and I'm asked a lot, like, what about eggs? Okay, I don't want to support eggs. I know they're not healthy. There's lots of dietary cholesterol. There's saturated fat. There's animal protein, all of which cause problems in the human body. But what do you do? How do you deal with not eating eggs? The first question I ask people is, in what form are you eating those eggs? Because we eat eggs in a lot of different ways, right? We make custards, we use them for baking, we make scrambled eggs, we make, hard-boiled eggs. So there's a lot of ways to use eggs, and there's not one answer. The good news is there are many answers to enjoy a fulfilling life without chicken's eggs in your life, but it really depends on in what form and in what capacity you tend to eat chicken's eggs. So feel free to reach out to me. You can still get the joy of vegan baking, which definitely will cover all of your egg-free baking needs. But there's a lot more to say about that. And the answer is, in short, of course, you can live without chicken's eggs. I've been doing so for 25 years, and it's a very fulfilling life indeed. But the next question I get from people is usually, all right, I know someone, they've got hens, they love their hens, they treat them with kindness, they have the most incredible barn for them, they're spoiled beyond belief, they're never going to kill them, they name them, they're part of the family, but they do eat their eggs. What's wrong with that? Okay, so let's unpack this. First of all, I will say, it just has to be said, that you really can't get away from the fact that whatever hens they have, wherever they came from, they most likely came from some hatchery where the males were killed. So you still can't get away from that. It has to be said. But here's what I think. Look, if someone has a hen as a companion animal, maybe they even adopted them from a sanctuary, and that hen drops eggs, as females will do, because eggs are a natural part of the female reproductive system, and that person wants to eat that bird's eggs, I actually have no ethical objection to someone eating her eggs in this kind of situation. I have more to say about that, but I don't have an ethical objection. I know some people who've had sanctuaries and they use their eggs. A lot of them use their eggs for the dogs. They will make scrambled eggs, or they will give them the hard-boiled eggs and they'll give them to their dogs, or because birds can be cannibalistic, they actually feed the hens their eggs back to them, or they can put them out for wild birds. So that is something that other people do, and it's really up to you. But consuming the eggs of a hen who has dropped her eggs, it's not like with cow's milk, the production of which would not exist without impregnating the female and keeping the baby away from that milk. So you have to impregnate the female. We have many episodes on this. You have to impregnate the female. You have to keep the baby away, and you have an unwanted calf. And if he's a male, he's killed right away. And if she's a female, she gets put in the same servitude as her mother. With hens, it's different. You can consume that egg without exploiting that animal. But listen, this is what is interesting to me. There is a difference between having a hen as a pet, as a companion animal, and taking care of her until she dies naturally, and having a hen because she's considered quote unquote livestock. In other words, I do think the difference lies in intention. My taking care of an animal and eating her eggs, or me taking care of a hen and eating her eggs that she inevitably drops, and having a hen because she lays eggs, those are two different things. And you will make different decisions based on what your intention is. Because the question becomes, what happens to the hen when her production wanes? Is she valued only for the eggs she drops, or for the life she possesses? Were the hens bought from a hatchery where male chicks were killed? Probably. And what happens to her at the end of her life? I just think we romanticize animal agriculture way too much and create these lovely scenarios that don't necessarily reflect reality. Many people don't realize the cost and energy required for keeping animals. And so many hens, many animals are dumped at city shelters when people can no longer afford to feed them and care for them and coyote-proof their living situation, their barns at night. It's very expensive to keep animals alive. And if you're not making anything back, you make very different decisions at the end of their lives, especially when they need, kind of geriatric care, which most animals do. So that's just my point, is that it really depends on what your intention is. Now, if you asked me personally, and many people do, because we tend to like these hypothetical situations, I'm happy to answer. We all play these kind of what if games. So if you were to ask me, would I eat the eggs of chickens, of hens, if I had companion hens? And I don't have companion hens. There are plenty of people who do. There are plenty of vegans who do. And what people do That's not my business. But if you were to ask me if I had hens, and I'm never going to have hens, it is so much work to keep hens. And I really value wildlife, and I don't want to constantly fight with wild animals to keep them out of, basically what is a smorgasbord for them. So I have no intention of ever having hens. But if I had hens, would I eat their eggs that they inevitably lay? My answer is no. I wouldn't. Not only because A, I have no desire to eat eggs. B, it has been so long since I've had an egg. I honestly have no desire for it. And that's one of the things that happens when you stop eating something like eggs or meat or dairy. You just lose the desire for them, right? It might not feel that way when you're first getting rid of them out of your diet, but eventually you really have no desire to eat the eggs of chickens. C, they contain all of these foodborne pathogens. They contain saturated fat and dietary cholesterol. I have no desire to increase my own, body's cholesterol by consuming dietary cholesterol. And D, I just don't see them as food. Once you change the lens through which you look and you embrace eggless baking and you embrace eggless cooking, you just stop seeing the products of the chicken's reproductive cycle as tempting or tasty. So I can't even imagine baking with eggs now. It's been so long since I have. I'd have to retrain myself to bake with eggs. Are there any baked goods that I'd like to use eggs for that I can't do? I guess the only thing I would say, I used to say meringue. It's so funny. I used to say meringue. But the truth is, now that we have aquafaba, it's not meringue. I make meringue all the time. And isn't that a wonderful thing? And aquafaba has really, I think, changed the baking game for a lot of people, vegan or non-vegan. I think the only thing that's really difficult to bake with or to bake without eggs is choux pastry to make eclairs. It can be done. So don't send me letters saying that, of course, it can be done. It's just tougher. It's hard. But I don't care. I'm going to go the rest of my life, possibly not having choux pastry, and I am fine with that. I'm fine with that. I said that, though, about meringue, and then aquafaba came along. So maybe if I just put this out into the universe, someone will come along with the best product for making choux pastry, so I can make my own eclairs or profiteroles. Anyway, the point is I'd have to retrain myself to bake with eggs because it's been so long since I have been baking without eggs. I also think, to be really honest, I think it's easier for people to just make a clean break. If you have started eating chicken's eggs from your own hands, I think it becomes easier and easier to justify eating eggs when you go out to a restaurant or in that muffin from a cafe. And before you know it, you're contributing to the violence you really say that you're against. We don't have a need to eat these things. So I would just encourage people to just avoid them altogether. I'm not a fan of the slippery slope argument. I think it's overused, but I do think this would be a case of a slippery slope argument, that if you start eating the eggs from a chicken you have in your own home, that it just makes it easier to justify eating egg-based products elsewhere because you think that they're also coming from, humane situations. Just because we've all been taught that eating eggs is essential, it doesn't mean they are. I personally revel in the fact that we can make new choices. We have so many options. And when I first recorded this podcast episode, it was in 2006. Yes, I have been doing this podcast since 2006, actually. It was the first year I recorded the podcast. And there weren't as many options then as there are now. And even then I was like, there's so many options. There are so many more options today. Just egg, and a lot of Just Egg products are really wonderful, and some other products out there. There are just so many. And, lots of vegan baking books. Mine was one of the first vegan baking books out there that came out in 2000. When did it come out? 2007? 2008. I was writing it in 2007. So there are so many options out there. I think we're incredibly spoiled. And I think it's just a matter of shifting our gaze from what's familiar and what we're conditioned to believe and what we're conditioned to eat to just something new and something different. It's just a habit that has been ingrained in us. And it's just a matter of changing that habit. And that's the reason I do the work I do. And it's the reason I continue to do this work. Just because we can doesn't mean we have to. Just because we once did doesn't mean we have to continue doing so. Being human, being open is about trying new things, learning new things, and becoming the compassionate people we say we want to be. So thanks for listening, everyone. If you like what you heard, please share it with others. Please leave a review. Please follow this podcast, and please support the production of these messages by becoming a supporter at joyfulvegan.com. You can go to the donate button there, or you can go straight to patreon.com, search for my name, Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, and check out other episodes. In the meantime, for the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.